Emma, hello.
Hello, Emma.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. It's nice to see you as always.
Likewise, yeah. It's for anyone who has not come across either of our stories before, we are both Emmas. We've both been injured by pharmaceuticals, by benzodiazepines, and both British. We're both given the benzos abroad, and now we're both on this healing journey. And we're also both making films and kind of really leaning in on our creativity as a way to
Yeah.
endure this, not just endure it, but actually come out the other side of this
Yeah.
stronger, healthier, happier, etc. So, would you like to just sort of introduce yourself and your story a little bit for anyone who is new to your story?
Yeah. And also, what's so kind of crazy with our similarities is that we both do music as well. It's not even just
Mm,
like activity. It's like this just so bizarre.
it is weird, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And we're both doing these films. It's like it's the divine intervention.
I mean, it does make you think sometimes. There's just moments in life where you go, is it coincidence or is there something else? But what does it mean? Like, what is the meaning of the meaning? Um, but anyway,
I like to
TBC.
think that this this needs to be stopped. Do you know what I mean? And it's like it's all rising. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
I would agree with that. Absolutely. And I do, just on that note, I feel like there's a real sense of it's I think a lot of people that get harmed by this are very creative people. And so it sort of
mm,
naturally feels like the poetic justice of kind of air quotes fighting back through creativity
yeah,
as well.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so before this happened to me, I was an actor, photographer, and sort of all-round creative being. And then obviously the pandemic hits and I get given lorazepam for tinnitus. So I had broken sleep at that stage. I mean, it wasn't really even that bad. I went into the doctor and I said, yeah, I've got broken sleep. I'm worried about my tinnitus. And he gave me this lorazepam drug. I'd never heard of it before. I wish that he'd said Valium because I would have known. I would have been like, oh, that's Valium. I don't think you're supposed to take that. Anyway, so, but he said it was safe. He said he gave it to old women. And so I was just really trusting him. He was a private doctor that came recommended. So what do you do? And he said
Mm.
it could help my tinnitus. So that was also the thing. I was taking this pill as prescribed, being like, this is going to help me. So that's what I did. It was a very strange time being COVID. So I didn't actually see him again. I saw him once. And then from that point onwards, he would give me the prescription online. And I ended up going, because my dad lives in Spain, I ended up going there trying to escape somewhere nicer for the pandemic. And so I got my prescriptions for 6 months. I took it for 6 months, and yeah, in that time I became very unwell. Like, looking back, I lost a lot of weight. It sort of happened quite quickly for me, whereas I know a lot of people can be on these drugs for like a long time, and it's not necessarily like that, but we're all different. So yeah, within about a month, I was experiencing this anxiety, and it just went from bad to worse. And after 6 months of taking it, I came off it. The doctor told me just to stop taking it. There was no need, no mention of a taper. And I sort of intuitively by that time knew something was up, so I needed to come off it. And yeah, just got thrown into benzodiazepine withdrawal, which went on for a good sort of best part of a year. And in that time, I got sectioned 3 times and polydrugged. And I mean, so much stuff happened in that time. It's just crazy. So yeah, many details, but the important one was that I guess somehow one morning I take a tiny bit of the lorazepam, which was actually advice from somebody else who had gone through it. And at this point, I'm psychosis, akathisia, I'm in the worst possible state. And I take this half a lorazepam, and within 30 minutes, I come back to myself. And it didn't make any sense at that point as to why it worked then. A lot of people say reinstatement, is actually will make you feel worse, which it did do earlier in the withdrawal. So for me, it was like a miracle moment, and I got polydrugged, so I ended up on 3 medications, and whew, basically now I'm on that journey of getting off all of them, and I've just come off quetiapine, which took me 2.5 years.
Wow.
So, and it's been a full 4 years of this whole thing so far.
Mm.
And I've still got 2 medications to come off.
Wow. You're doing
Awful
such a
going in
great
fertility.
job. Yeah, I mean that's
Thank
what's crazy. I feel like with almost every story that I think I've heard around this, it's with fairly, I don't know what the right word is, but fairly non-serious things that can be addressed in other ways. And it still shocks me that these drugs that are highly, highly dangerous, life-threatening level dangerous potentially, are given as the first
you.
port of call and not the last, without informed consent with the patients.
Mhm.
One thing that I've meant to ask you, I don't know if I've asked you this before, but when did it kind of click for you that this was medication harm in terms of you feeling exponentially
Mm.
worse? When was that kind of aha moment?
So I looked back in the emails, and I've sort of gone into like, it's just so weird when you come back from it and you look back and you're like, wow. And I intuitively knew a month in to taking the lorazepam that I wasn't feeling myself, and I was having very unusual amounts of anxiety. And it was supposed to be helping me sleep, but in fact, I was getting up so early in the morning with these surges of terror. And so that's what kind of made me go onto the internet, and, Wikipedia has it on there. It says, benzodiazepines are addictive. These are all the risks and the dangers. And so I went to this doctor and I said, hey, I've seen this stuff on the internet. And I just got completely gaslit, like so intensely. He was just like, oh, don't believe Google. Google writes all sorts of silly stuff about all sorts of things. And it's weird because at the time you kind of want to get better. I wanted my tinnitus to get better, so I was just following his advice. But
Mm.
intuitively, it was very early on that I sort of was cottoning on to something that wasn't quite right at all.
Yeah, again, I feel like that's quite common.
Mm.
Certainly similar with my story where it was like, I'm not sure this is right or safe, but then I mean, literally, I had doctors tell me, do not listen to doctor or do not read Dr. Google, in quite a
Yes.
patronizing way. And it's, yeah.
Oh.
And it's just very ironic that actually in this case, and I'm not saying this is a blanket statement for medical treatment, but in this case, it seems like the internet is actually all the information that is on the
Mhm.
internet from people that have gone through it and from very sort of 0.001% of the medical industry that do understand this, putting this information out there, Dr. Heather Ashton, etc. That's where the life-saving information has been, and that through the official channels that we're supposed to trust is where people end up in these horrific circumstances with years of their life, months, years, or even their life itself lost. And that just
Mhm.
kind of blows my mind in this day and age that that is actually what's happening in this specific case.
Yes, and it happens way more than anyone thinks. Like
Yeah.
even myself, who obviously came to know people like you, and I got onto the online community, and you find people, don't you, along the way, and you're like, oh my god, oh, there's all these other people. But it still shocks me how many people there are that are suffering with this, and it's
Yeah.
just not spoken about.
It's not really documented or monitored. We don't really know. I think it's just our sense of scope through being online and
Mm.
talking to people and kind of gauging, the internationality aspect of it. Every kind of industrialized country has this issue, with people from all walks of life that have literally just gone in and trusted their doctors with anxiety, with insomnia, with pain, with, similar things, and then ended up in these really horrific predicaments.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of why we're here today, is we've both been harmed by this medication called a benzodiazepine, which, as you say, is your likes of your Valium, your Xanax,
Mhm.
which are very, very commonly prescribed, yet the informed consent that's needed to prevent loss of life, prevent horrific suffering is not given in the same way that these pills themselves are given, and then they're often mismanaged. So we're both two people that have been harmed by these.
Yeah.
And today we're having this discussion around something that's very personal to both of us, which we sort of stumbled on in terms of realizing the other one was thinking about it, I think a couple of weeks ago on Facebook or something.
Yeah.
Um, about the issue of fertility. So
Mm.
should we start there? Should we start with your Facebook post and kind of where this has come from, and why now for you? Why is this an issue sort of now?
Yes. So, well, actually, so I was sort of met with, I think I was probably 34 when I, when did I stabilize? I think I stabilized on the benzo at 34, like with the reinstatement. And then I was met with basically 3 drugs and not knowing really if I was going to survive from one minute to the next. So I wasn't thinking at 35, I'm going to go find a partner and have a baby. But obviously, normally at that age, that's 100% what I would have been doing. And I would have been, well, yeah, that's what you want, isn't it? Everyone, if you want to start a family. So I've had the last couple of years just focusing on this tapering and getting off the medication. And because I was on lorazepam and quetiapine, two very non, I don't want to be on those drugs and have babies. I want to get off them and I want to know that I'm safely off them before I even think about it. And so once I got off the quetiapine, I was like, almost had this moment where I was like, babies, I like part of me was like, am I ever going to get off this? Because I was put on such a high dose and I really experienced such bad side effects trying to come off it. So I think the reason why it's coming up for me like now really is because I'm really seeing myself getting off all this medication, and
Mm,
there is a possibility that, there's a possibility that I could have children. Whereas before, I just actually had to put it to back. Like, I was like, I just need to focus on survival right now. Like, I
mm-hmm,
can't even think about that.
mm.
I'm sure you relate with that, no? With your story and like the amount of time that you have been healing.
Yeah, and I think it's very similar in the sense of when you're in the midst of it, you are literally in survival mode. Just sort
Mm.
of like, am I gonna make it through this? Is my body gonna survive this? You can't really think outside of that because it's
That.
just it's very it's not dissimilar, I don't think. I've not been in a serious car accident, but the emotions that you would have if you were trapped in a car wondering, is the car going to roll down the cliff? Is it going to, implode? Um,
Mm.
it's like that, but on a chronic level in terms of every day, every week, not necessarily every second, but it kind of ebbs and flows. And so when you're in that state of mind, physiologically, psychologically, you're not thinking about the normal things in life, your career and family planning and everything else. And so it's a weird thing when you realize you're sort of out of the car and you're getting out of it at least, and you feel this sense of relief and hope again. But then you're
Mm.
also it does sort of feel like someone just burnt your house down to the ground, and you're like, okay, wow, I've survived. You survive, but then you're also looking at the carnage around you and figuring out, where do I go from here to start rebuilding, and sort of starting to get a scale of and a sense of time again.
Yeah.
So yeah, very similar. Like, as I just started healing more physically, it kind of started becoming more of a thing to think
Mm.
about.
Yes, I know, because it's the impact is like I lost all my money. And like if you want to start a family, it's like you want some sort of stability, and everything that I'd
Mm,
worked towards up until that point just felt like it all went. And it's not a linear healing process. You can't just like, oh, I'm right back into work now and I can,
right.
it's really, yeah, a long time. Like I'm 5 weeks off the quetiapine now, but I'm experiencing side effects at the moment, and I'm having to take it really easy. Things like migraines, body pains,
Mm,
and yeah, it's like you have to really navigate. You have to just take care of yourself through this time.
yeah.
Uh, Whereas if this hadn't happened to me, I'd be like probably buzzing around London. I don't know, getting money in the bank and finding a nice man and having a baby.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing to think about, isn't it? When you sort of, because somebody asked me this directly when I was at Cannes actually a few weeks ago. And they
Mm.
said, what would you want your life to be like now if you hadn't gone through bind, which is a perfectly legitimate question. But it also was like, wow, yeah, I exactly as you said, I would have wanted my career to be in a certain place, and to be fairly settled down, and maybe, I mean, I don't want necessarily a child tomorrow or a family tomorrow, but at least to be in a position where I can think about that. and
Exactly.
know that it's definitely an option. And so you're sort
Mhm.
of coming to terms with that realization of, this is what I would have done if this thing hadn't happened to me, if other humans hadn't put this situation on me without my consent. But then it's also kind of having the gratitude that we still can work towards that. It's just there's these hurdles and these things to figure out. So it's kind of it's a weird kind of dichotomy of emotions, I guess.
Mhm.
I imagine it's the same for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like sometimes it's made me feel like if I think about it too much, it makes me feel quite hopeless because it's like not so much now, but before when I was really tapering and experiencing so many bad side effects, I was just thinking, oh my God, like how am I ever gonna be in a
Mm,
position to actually for this to happen at all?
mm. Yeah, and
Uh
sorry, go on.
yeah, yeah. Like just there was an element of like, I suppose like you were saying survival mode where you're just in that for so long. And I almost had to I couldn't think about it too much because it was too upsetting. I was like, I can't think about how long this is going to take.
Yeah, and also I think, as well as the time element, because your whole sense of time just gets completely skewed as well. You think, I mean, when this first happened to me, I was thinking they're going to figure it out in a few weeks, and then suddenly 8 years has gone by. So your whole sense of kind of time scale of things is completely off. And obviously the
Yeah,
cognitive effects, which nobody can see, you can't prove it, you can't, nobody can really sense what that's like unless they've been in that position directly. But it's kind of a surreal thing where you just lose sense of time and scale of time and all of this. But also the other big factor for me in this, which we'll get onto as we go into the conversation more, but is the trust element with the medical system. Like, we've ended
mm,
up in this position because of trusting in the medical system, and now in order obviously to have a family, then you have to retrust in that. So that's another thing that's kind of like, I think maybe on some subconscious level, I've been a little bit reticent to
yeah.
investigate this because it's scary to go back to the system that put you in the situation in the first place.
Yes, completely. That's such a good point. And actually, that resistance and that almost like I almost just like no, like my body's just like no. And
Mm.
so that has made me, yeah, made me not feel so like, oh, I'm gonna have a baby, get pregnant, and end up in hospital. Like I couldn't think of anything worse.
Yeah, yeah. So it's and I think that's why we're having this conversation is because, and why we wanted to have this conversation publicly, because we're aware that we're probably not the only two women that have been affected by this, that are having these thoughts. And it's probably not really seen as a, how do you say it? It's a women's health issue, but it's also a men's health issue. This is affecting men in every sense of the word as well. But the
Mhm.
fertility element is not something that I've seen. I've not seen it talked about really. I mean, it's probably out there somewhere. Um, but there are all these kind of nuanced uh, moments of hope and moments of concern that kind of are all entangled within themselves,
Yeah.
that's really overwhelming to try and figure out yourself when you're already just trying to deal with your actual recovery and rebuilding of your life in general, let alone thinking about, how do I bring another human into the world if I want to, at what point, etc. So that's why we're having this conversation today, is to kind of shed a light on those things.
Yeah. And all the women that I know are going through this now, and I do speak to them through my page, people who are in their 30s who want to start a family, and yeah, going through this process.
mm,
Yeah.
it's and it's sad to see it, and then there's also part of you that's like, oh, there is a community there that are going
Mm.
through this, but you just would prefer none of us are going through it at
Ever
all.
did. It's
um
terrible.
yeah, and I think the trust thing, there was one doctor that said to me with regards to the COVID vaccine, when I was inquiring about that, and they said, well, we don't actually know what's happened to you. We don't know what's happened to your body, your central nervous system, your brain. So that has played on my mind a lot, in terms of, well, if you don't know what's happened to me, how on earth can I trust you with regards to navigating this massive, massive thing that could happen?
Mm.
So yeah, anyway, we'll come on to that in a minute. So according to the Benzo Information Coalition website, which is kind of the trusted body around benzodiazepine harm, they do say that there are numerous risks to developing fetuses whilst they are in the womb, and that these are kind of unknown, but also some are known. From what I've seen, and we are just to kind of say this and put this out there, we are just going to have a very candid, open conversation around this because we are learning. We're going to share what we've both found with each other and share that publicly. So I had seen that they basically say there's a lot of risk there, but that but also that most women do not get the informed consent around the risk as well. So you've got this situation where you have got women being put on these medications, which, again, according to them, women are more likely to be prescribed benzodiazepine than men, especially by male medical practitioners. So then you've got the situation where there are X amount of women worldwide, and we're talking in the millions here. This is not just a few handful of people around the world, there's millions who are given these prescription medicines and then find out that they may be pregnant, only to realize that the medication that they're on, they can't come off easily, but if they stay on it, they could harm their unborn child.
It's crazy. Yeah.
And this is happening, as I say, in every industrialized country. So it's another reason to have this conversation, to kind of, again, raise awareness of this, because we can talk about benzodiazepines, we can talk about the risks, but I think it just hits on another level as well with women and men all over the world to say, well, actually, these medications that are being given could be harming your child, and you may not even be aware of it because the doctors haven't given you that information. For you and I, it's another level in terms of unknown factors, because there isn't, from what I've seen, and I don't know what you found, but from what I've seen, there isn't much information on the risks and the likelihood of XYZ happening once you've come off the benzodiazepine as well. So that information from Benzo Information Coalition was for women that are still taking benzodiazepines. But as we know, there's such an unknown factor with the long-term effects. So yeah, just what have you gauged so far from what you've seen out there about the general risks with this?
I know, it's like I want to speak to more women that have gone through this and have then gone to have children, and it's all been fine. And yeah, I think maybe it's because it is something that is still not spoken about much, and it's just sort of starting to appear. But I know instinctively that there must be so many women out there who are wondering, can I have children after all this medication? I mean, I was on 3, and I'm like, God, what's happened to my body in that time? You know. But I did actually speak to one lady who I met in a yoga class who randomly had the same experience. It was the craziest thing. And she went on to have children, and she was absolutely fine. I almost saw that as like a sign. I was like, oh, hope.
Was she
Because,
called
yeah,
Emma and also making another documentary? Because I feel like you're just magnetizing.
Yeah, crazy. But I have met one woman in real life who did have this experience and went on to have a child. So I'm guessing it's kind of an unknown.
Yeah.
Because it's invisible. You know, like you say, you can't see what's going on with these things.
Yeah. And I think that's what's frustrating. We can obviously go in for certain tests around fertility, but I haven't seen any concisive tests on the ongoing effects of benzodiazepines on the system, and how there's no real test for how your central nervous system is holding up after going through something like this. So as I say, there are some fertility tests there, which seem like a good idea, but in terms of the actual benzo harm, we just don't know.
Exactly. And I've also been very resistant to doing a fertility test, especially when I was on the quetiapine, because I know that really affects hormones, and it makes you produce this hormone that makes you produce breast milk. It's like the most bizarre thing. My boobs were so painful throughout taking that drug. So I just thought, I want to get off all the meds and then do my fertility test. I just don't want to be disheartened, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's such a difficult decision between giving yourself enough buffer time with the healing and then
Mm,
also being, you know, being reassured that you're still within the time frame to make things happen and be able to freeze eggs. So that's not something we've really talked about. And obviously, feel free to go into this as much or as little as you want on your personal circumstances. But would you ideally want to freeze your eggs, or are you kind of ready for something to happen sooner, or are you still exploring options?
So I'm 37, 38 in November. And the thing is about this whole experience is it's not good on the bank account and it's not linear, the healing. And it's taken me a long time to get financially at all really back to a good place. So egg freezing is not cheap.
Mm,
It's really expensive. And it also involves being injected with hormones. And like we were saying, going back into that hospital environment, the doctors, and it's such an unknown. And because I'm still tapering, I mean, often people say, they have setbacks from antibiotics when they're tapering, or
mm,
setbacks from something they were given in an IV. Anything kind of can interact with our nervous systems. And so it also feels like a massive risk for me to actually freeze my eggs at this point. As much as I'd like to, I don't have the money, and I also don't want to be put into neurological hell
yeah,
from the hormones that they pump into me. You just don't know, do you? How
yeah, and
about you?
yeah, that's also my concern. I think
Mm,
that's, yeah, they are my two biggest concerns. I mean, I'm in a position where, as I say, I don't necessarily want to start, well, I don't want to start a family tomorrow, or
mhm,
like the short term. Um,
mhm,
but I think for me, I want to know that I still have that choice. Like,
exactly.
that just feels like a fundamental human right choice for anyone to say, I would like to have a child. That hasn't been taken away from me by other
Mhm,
people.
mhm,
Um, so I think it's just about keeping the door open for as and when.
yeah.
So yes, in my case, I would potentially want to freeze eggs, but also, again, it's tricky because part of me thinks that makes more sense to do the more I heal and the further out I am from
Mm,
taking this and from my brain and nervous system healing. Um, and it's kind of finding the sweet spot in terms of health. But as you say, there's this other layer of finances as well, because
mhm,
you can't work when you're going through this level of injury. And for me, that's been 8 years. I was 28 that I gave up I had to give up my full-time job. So most people our age have been building their careers, building their finances,
mhm,
and we haven't. And we haven't, for anyone who's watching this and wondering if we've received compensation or anything like that, the answer is no.
mhm.
And obviously that's something that probably everybody is exploring, but it's not happened. And that would make it an easier decision for me. I think if I got compensation and tests came back and they were fine, fertility tests and everything else, and maybe I was just a little bit more out of this, because I realize I probably seem like I'm healed and I've come a long way, but there are still remnants there. There's still, I still have my
Mhm.
moments. Last night I slept 3 hours, and sometimes the brain can just do that. And that, like you say, it's just so non-linear, and we're aware that we still have those vulnerabilities. Like if I needed another pill, like I, broke an ankle or something, they gave me drugs. We just don't know if that could cause a setback, and that's really scary. Um,
Yeah.
so I think I'd want to be further out and ideally have the finances to comfortably say I'm going to do this, and then that for me would be my ideal outcome sort of going forward. But there's just so much to explore with it.
No. And also actually going through birth.
Yeah, yeah, that little thing as well.
Like, that's a huge thing for the body. And when the body is
Mm,
healing from this kind of injury, it's like, wow, you've got all those hormones, you've got all these bodily changes. It's like you say, you want to feel
mm.
like your body can take it.
100%. And it's just so funny you bring that up, because I'm like, that's probably the scariest element. It's like, oh yeah, and
Right?
also the birth.
Carrying the child for 9 months,
Yeah, just
creating
just that
them.
thing. And raising
Yeah.
it raising he or she for 18 years plus. Um, this is about to shut down, so I'll resend you the invite
Okay, cool. See you in a minute.
in a minute.